So, I haven't looked at this thing. Oh, it's already there. They did it for me. That's pretty easy. There's only 2 buttons. You can't really get it wrong. So we are starting this morning, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting a brand new sermon series. And this is a sermon series that Greg and I have been working on and working through for a while. And it's something that we're very excited about. And the reason that we're excited about it is because we actually are trying to do, for once, not just kidding, we're trying to do something that's useful and practical and helpful. That each Sunday when we're here during the service, we will leave and we will feel like, not like we've learned something that's kind of interesting, although hopefully we learn things that are interesting, and not that we just are told something that we can talk about at lunch, although hopefully we'll actually talk about these things at lunch, because if we're willing to do that, that will take root in our lives. But the hope is that what we talk about and what we learn each week will actually be useful. That it's something that as we reflect and as we take time to engage with what's going on, this will make what happens Monday through Saturday better. It'll make our lives richer. It'll allow the things that are supposed to be major in our lives to remain major, and the things that so easily creep in to get pushed back to their rightful place. And so it's our hope, whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, if it's your first time here, if you've been here for forever, that this is something, you don't even have to believe the Bible. You don't have to believe what we're talking about here for this to be relevant. But as we look at this story centered around Jesus, we hope that what we see here, we can at least be open to the idea of looking at that and seeing how this story is able to breathe life, and maybe into areas like Shireen read earlier, areas that just feel dead, areas where the world has creeped in, areas where all of a sudden it used to be life and joyful, and it just feels like a dead weight. And so this morning, we're in the first week of that series, and this week is just called Review. And it's review, and there's a neat little hyphen, if you can see it up there, because in order to review, or the purpose of reviewing, is oftentimes to get a new view, to view it again, to see something a little bit differently. You're looking at the same thing, only through a different set of eyes. And so as Greg and I were kind of thinking and dreaming and just praying over this series, we really wanted to come to a place where the subtitle for this series was really, really useful. The subtitle pointed us in the direction of what actually matters. And so we wrestled with this, and we tried to figure out how to get the subtitle of the series to be really, really good. And we eventually landed with experiencing life through the spiritual rhythms, and we'll get to why that is. But we went through a couple others, and a couple of them were actually pretty good, and so I just want to share with you what a couple of them we went through. So one of the ones that we considered for a while was Coming Alive, because if we wait too much longer, we'll be dead. And it's funny, unless it's actually your marriage, or it's actually your finances, or it's actually your job. That's funny. It's a funny thing to think about, but we have these things that weigh in on us, and they creep in, and they take away our joy, and they sit heavy. And we know that if we wait too much longer, we're dead. And then we thought, but there's a lot of us that aren't feeling like we're dead, and so that kind of pigeonholes it into a specific group of people, and it doesn't really give the hope that we want. That just says, do something before you die, and that's kind of a morbid way to think about life. So we continued to rethink, and we came up with this, and this is maybe the one that I was the most excited about, and Greg and I ran with this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we thought that if we could just write a sermon series that was able to fit this description, if we could write messages and messages, people would leave inspired and happier. And here's kind of what we came up with, is we just Coming Alive, achieving the life that you always wanted but never thought you could have by following our simple 6-step plan that is guaranteed to make you happier, richer, less stressed, more popular, have perfect children, and make better choices, all while having more free time and losing weight. And we thought if we could get people to do that, 6 steps, just going to be happier, richer, less stressed, more popular. If we could do that, we would be set. And so we spent days and days just praying about this and trying to figure out how to do it. And we made some good headway. And we wrote some pretty good sermons. We bought some books that people have written that kind of tell you they have a simple 6-step plan. But what we realized is those books aren't true, because no one can lose weight. And so we just if we can't get people to lose weight, no one really wants to be happier, richer, and less stressed if we can't lose weight. So we just nixed the whole thing and decided it's not worth it. And we're just going to go with Coming Alive, experiencing life through the rhythms. And jokes aside, if you were here a couple weeks ago, you heard Greg reference this. And kind of the place that this series really gets root is in a very simple statement that Jesus made. A simple statement as Jesus recorded in the Gospel of John. So John, looking back at the life that Jesus lived, at the things he taught, at the things he knew to be true, he writes this down, and this is what he wrote. In John 10:10, he just says, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And we start to think about that, and I know that for a lot of us, when we think about life, all we think about is the things that we have to do and the things that weigh in. And we have to check all the boxes so we can get to the end of the week without having fallen behind too far. And that's not what Jesus said he came to do. And the hard thing is that even Christianity or any religious system can start to feel like more boxes to check to get to the end of the week so that we don't feel like we've fallen too far behind. And so as we look at this idea that the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy, but that Jesus has come to have life to the full, it's just our hope that within this series, within Coming Alive, we're able to set things aside. We're able to kind of figure out, all right, what is it? What does life to the full mean? What does it look like? I used to know what life to the full was. I seem to have lost that. But what would it look like for life to the full to actually come back? And I think, for me, I was trying to think about what does life to the full actually look like? If I were to tell someone what I look like at my best, what am I doing in my life on a daily basis or on a weekly basis at my best? I think there's some things that I was thinking about. I talked to some people about what they do, what it would look like for them. And we came up with a pretty simple list. And this is easy. If we could just do these things, our life would be better. And for almost everyone, I guess I have to just apologize. For everyone who still is wanting to exercise, this is the first one that comes up. Make time to exercise. If I could just get healthy, if I could just take care of myself a little bit more, then I would feel better. But the thing is, and so we start making time to exercise, and we start exercising, and it's going really, really, really well. And so then we start to eat better. And we go, man, if I can exercise and feel well, what if I start cooking instead of eating out? And what if I'm able to take time? And all of these things, good things. I mean, we should be exercising, and we should be eating better. Like, God actually cares about our bodies. We should actually care about our health and what we feel like. Those things are important, but it's not the only thing. And then, if we can make time to exercise, and we can take the time to cook and eat better, why not start sleeping more? Then we can just start sleeping more. And if we could sleep more, we'd be happier, we'd be less irritable, our kids would be nicer, our jobs would be more productive, everything would be better if we could just sleep more. And since we're in good shape and eating better and we sleep more, then we're just going to be like the Allums and we're just going to take a family vacation. Her favorite thing to do, just go take a vacation. And maybe if we can't take a vacation, we realize that in our stage of life, what we need to do is just have a family game night. We're just like, I can't do all these things, but the thing I need to do for my family to be fully alive, the thing that I need to do for me to be fully alive, is to just have a family game night. I'm just going to bring the kids back. I'm going to fly them in from all over the country, and we're just going to have a game night. Or they're home from school, and we're just going to have a game night. Set the distractions aside. Set the things that try to steal life aside, and we're just going to have a game night. And now for us, not all of these things are possible, right? This is a generic list. And we all have our own lists, and they all have different things on it. What would it look like to be fully alive? And that's an important question for each of us to answer, and we'll come back to that towards the end. I think the one other thing that comes up a lot, if people were to start living fully alive, is just stop spending money on stupid things. Like somebody comes to your house and you're like, where did you get that? And they're like, you can leave. You don't want to know where I got that. Or somebody buys it and it's like, well, it was 50% off. Well, you still spent $400. They didn't give you the $400 back. You still spent it. And so if we could just stop spending our money on these stupid things and take control of our finances, then maybe all of a sudden we would feel like we're actually living fully alive. And so there's all these things, and we have our own lists. And at different moments, we're super successful. We're making time to exercise. We're eating well. We're sleeping. Stuff at work is good. Stuff with the family is good. We're not spending our money on things that just are gone, and it collects dust. And we're like, why did I buy that? But then what also starts to happen is that busyness happens. Because for each of these, if you take time to exercise, it takes time. If you take time to eat better, it takes time. When you take time to sleep more, it takes, look at you guys. If you take a family vacation, it takes, this is so great. If you have a family game night, they all take time. And when you start to add in things that make your life more full, all of a sudden busyness happens. And the thing is, you're adding in what you want to do to feel fully alive, but the have-to-dos are still happening. You can't get rid of the things that you have to do. We all have obligations, whether it's to family or to employers or to school or whatever it is, social obligations, obligations to our friends. There's things that we have to do, and those things don't go away. And so we have all these things we want to do, but then busyness happens, and we still have things that we can't do, and then we just get distracted. We just get distracted. The distractions happen. And so even though we know we want to exercise and eat better and sleep more and take vacations and stop spending money, and we get distracted. And the thing that was better, the place that we would find ourselves feeling fully alive, all of a sudden, we have been so distracted from the thing that mattered most that we've moved completely in a different direction. And in order for us, and in order for the sermon series that we're going into to make any sort of difference, we need to take the time and figure out, what does it look like to be fully alive? What's on my list? This is part of my list. It's not my entire list, because you guys would see what I would want to spend my time on, and you'd be like, he is a weird cookie. And so this part of my list, it's not all on my list. Your guys' lists are different. Life stages are different. Family obligations are different. Financial situations are different. Work life is different. But we all have our lists. If I had more time, if I could fit this in. But we can't. We don't have infinite time. We can't fit everything in. There's still things we have to do. And when we put it all together, we're going to get distracted. And we aren't the first people to feel this. It's not like this is a 21st century anomaly. Maybe it's harder because our cell phones are always in our hand. We can get an email at 11 p.m. Our employers can track us down whenever. Maybe it's a little more difficult, but it's not like the things that we want to do versus have to do. That's not a 21st century problem. That's something that's been going on, since human history has been recorded. And so distractions are always present. And so this morning, the story that we're going to look at and the story that we're going to jump into takes place in the Gospel of Luke. So if you're familiar with the Bible at all, you know that there's an Old and a New Testament. And in the New Testament, there's 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, that's where we'll be, and John. And what these are stories, these are people's accounts of what the life of Jesus was like. What did Jesus do? What did he spend his time doing? What did he say? Why does it matter? And so we are going to jump in this morning we're going to jump right into the middle of a story where Jesus is completely bookended. He has started into something, and he's in the midst of it. There's things he has to do. There's a timetable on the back end. He knows where he's headed, and he knows if he doesn't accomplish things along the way, his entire purpose for being here on earth will be missed. So the guy is stuck. He has no options but to make sure he achieves what he wants to achieve. So for him, getting rid of distraction and optimizing on the goal and looking in at what needs to happen is the most important thing he can do. And so we're going to jump into the story. We're going to get a little bit of context, and then we're just going to run with it. And we're going to get to the point where hopefully we can each at the end of this look at our own lives and have a better understanding of where we are going as well. So as the time approached for him, Jesus, to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out to go to Jerusalem. So this story we're going to look at in 1 second, we're picking it up. Jesus has left, and he is on the road towards Jerusalem, okay? And what is going to happen, as this verse shows us, the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven. So Jesus, throughout his life, has been claiming to be the Son of God, has been claiming to be God, has been making these really ridiculous claims that he's the Savior of the world, which, if you're in the friend market, these are not good claims to be making, just so you know. No one is going to like those claims. But Jesus continues to claim these things. And so as the time approaches for him to be taken up into heaven, Jesus resolutely, I love that Luke includes that. Jesus didn't just kind of decide and slip into this journey. He knew that Jerusalem was where he needed to get. It was the goal. It was the end. And so he resolutely determined he's getting there, set out to go to Jerusalem. So as Jesus is in the middle, when he gets to Jerusalem, he knows what waits on the other side. He's going to be wrongfully accused, wrongfully beaten, wrongfully convicted, wrongfully beaten again, wrongfully murdered, and eventually rise from the dead. And he knows that his time is limited. When he's setting out on this journey, he starts, and as he starts, there's no adding time in. The time that he has before he gets to Jerusalem is it. And so he can't do everything. So what Jesus chooses to do when he can't do everything probably should tell us something about what we should choose when we can't do everything. So here we go, jumping into the story. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, all right, they're on their way, they're going to Jerusalem. He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Jesus had the option of staying in an inn. When we're really busy, the last thing we want to do is go and have to entertain somebody else's hospitality, especially if we don't really know them and it might be kind of awkward. If we're going to be asked when we're tired or physically drained, going to someone's house and being asked to bring life into a house or to have a conversation because they're cooking you a meal, you guys have experienced this, it's tiring. When you're traveling, you might know someone you could stay with, but you don't really know them and it won't really feel like vacation if you have to stay with that person, so you get a hotel. And Jesus had that option. Him and his disciples, they had money. And so it's interesting, as they're on their way, they come to a village, and this woman named Martha opens her home to him. And so Jesus, doing what we all should do, is he says, all right, I can accept that gift of hospitality. And so he decides to stay with her. And so Martha, she also had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening. So Jesus' worst fears are confirmed at this point. He's not just going to go be a dinner guest. He has to be the entertainment. He has to care about people. He can't just turn his brain off. He has to be fully engaged. So he's on this journey. He has a timetable on the back end, and energy he wasn't planning on spending, he's now being asked to spend. And so he shows up. Martha's sister Mary is sitting at the Lord's feet listening to what he has to say. Which, if you guys read your Bibles or if you're students of history, maybe you've heard this or maybe you know what's actually going on here. But this is a huge deal because Mary's a woman. And in Jesus' time, women weren't worth teaching. Mary had no place at a rabbi's feet. In Jesus' society, you had children who were kind of down here, and if they annoy you, you just put them out onto the streets. I mean, the early church was known for taking in orphans, especially orphaned women, little girls, because it's not a little boy, so they get put out on the street. And so the early church was known for taking in not just their own Christian little children, but the children of all of Rome, especially little Roman girls. And so Jesus, on his road, he ends up in this house, he's sitting, and who's sitting at his feet? His disciples he's traveling with, and this woman who has no place being instructed, who's never been giving that honor in society. And I mean, guys, Jesus has more important things to do. I mean, he's on the way to be crucified and save the world. Why would he take time for some woman whose society doesn't care about? This person has no place within the gospel as a first century Jew would have seen it. And yet we see Jesus showing up to a house, keeping the goal in mind, and he's got some woman sitting at his feet. We'll come back to that. But Martha opens up her house, and so Martha, as the hostess, has things that she has to do. She has things that she has to do. So over here, Mary is just kind of floating through. She's enjoying the fact that she can sit at somebody's feet. I don't even think we could begin to understand the elation Mary would be feeling being invited to sit at Jesus' feet. I mean, Obama comes and you get to sit across the table. For some of you, that's not a political statement. Some of you would be angry about that. I get that. But we're going to say that the most respected person in the world in your eyes, they invite you into their house and they make you the guest of honor. Come learn from me. Come sit with me. The elation that we would feel, I don't even know if it could compare to what Mary would be feeling sitting at her feet. So over here we have Mary just living her dream. The list is being filled. And over here we have Martha, the hostess, and she's distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And that's something very, very interesting because Martha didn't have an option. The preparations had to be made. She brought them in. They need something to eat. She opened her house. She's on the hook. They need somewhere to sleep. She opened her house. She's on the hook. The things still have to happen. And so she was distracted by the preparations. Now, here's something that we know is true. That what we are distracted from is always more important than what we are distracted by. What we are distracted from is always, without a doubt, more important than what we are distracted by. When we're watching television and our kids, and we are distracted from the television by our children, when we phrase it and think of it in that way, we have decided that the television is more important than our children in that moment. When we are distracted from our children by the television, and we think about it and frame it that way, we have decided in that moment that our children are more important than the television. When we pull out our phones and we're trying to be on our phone and be in a conversation and we're distracted from the conversation by our cell phone, in that moment we have decided what is going on our cell phone is more important than the conversation we're having. But if we decide that what is going on our cell phone and we're distracted from our cell phone by the conversation, then we've decided that the cell phone is the most important thing. And so without a shadow of a doubt, every time, you can play this out anywhere in your life, what you're distracted from is always primary, always. And what you're distracted by comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. And if we can't decide what we're distracted from and what we are distracted by, what we're distracted from and what's doing the distracting, we can't even begin to answer this question. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. It's just one of those had-to-do things. She had no other options. She had to cook. She had to give them a place to stay. She opened up her house. Things that she had to do. And so Martha did what any of us would do. And she came to Jesus and she asked, she said, Lord, don't you care? Don't you realize, I get Mary's living the dream over here, but there's a lot of things that I have to do, and 2 hands are better than 1, and if you could just tell my sister to come over and help me, God, do you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Hey, Jesus, how about you tell her for me to help me? And when somebody's appealing to Jesus, hey, you tell her. Mom, tell him to stop. We've already asked him to stop. She's probably already asked Mary to help her. And she's at her last resort, and so she says, all right, Jesus, can you please tell her to come and help me? And the way that this is phrased in the Greek is very, very interesting, because the way that it's written in the Greek, we know that Martha expected a positive response from Jesus. She asks this, in the way that it's phrased, there's not a question. There's not even a question. Can you tell her to help me? And the only answer Martha could expect by the way she phrases the question is yes. And so Jesus answers, Martha, Martha. And you have to love it that Luke, for some reason, decides to put the name there twice. Because that says something about the spirit of Jesus when he's responding, the tone that he's taking. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. And then turning to Mary, Jesus said, go, help your sister prepare, for I am distracting you from making them. That's not it. Go, help your sister with the preparations, for I'm distracting you from making them. And as you guys read your Bibles, that's not what Jesus says, because Jesus knows that what is going on over here with Mary, that elevating the status of somebody who had no business sitting at the feet of a rabbi, is far more important even to Jesus, the one who the preparations are being made for, than the preparations themselves. And so what Jesus says is, he says, Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about all of these things. There's all these things that you have to do. There's all these preparations going on. But only a few things are needed. And indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better. And it will not be taken from her. From her. All these disciples sitting at Jesus' feet with a woman who has no place being there. The gospel's not for them. All of us in a church, maybe we're here because we follow Jesus, maybe we're here because somebody promised us free lunch, but we have the same things. The gospel's not for them. They could never have a place here. And we're so busy doing all the things that we have to do, sometimes all the religious things that we feel like we have to do, that we never stop to ask the question, have I drawn some line where the gospel isn't allowed to go? Have I put up some boundary? It won't be taken from her, but from them, it's definitely taken from them. I mean, if I have to sit in a room with them, they smell bad, they look gross, they make me feel uncomfortable, my parents said these things about them. It won't be taken away from her. Hey, you, who never had any place sitting at a rabbi's feet, come, front and center. You've chosen what is better. This story is amazing. Because if Jesus doesn't make it to Jerusalem, And if Jesus makes it to Jerusalem and he is burned out, and he doesn't have the strength that it took to be wrongfully accused and beaten and murdered and beaten, however it goes, if he doesn't have the strength to go through that, it's all for nothing. And so when Jesus is going to give energy and take time to turn society on its head in the midst of what was maybe the most profound and important thing that's ever happened in all of human history, we should probably pay attention to what he's going to take the time to do. And here's the thing. What we are distracted from is always more important than what we are distracted by. But we always spend our time thinking about what we're distracted by instead of thinking about what we're distracted from. When things creep in, we just figure out how to manage all the things we have to do. We figure out how to manage all of the distractions. How can I deal with these things in the best way possible? And there's no thought about what we're distracted from. All we think about is what we are trying to either do or not do. And so it's our hope that this series is not something that's just useful to think about, and it's not something that's just useful to talk about. Maybe you can get in the car and you can repeat some terrible jokes that I made, and that is worth why you came this morning. But it's our hope that this is beyond that this is tools in the toolbox, that when we stop and we go to lunch today, that we can have a conversation, and whether we're Christians or not, whether we believe this story or not, we know that this is a timeless truth, that what we are distracted from is always more important than what we're distracted by. And whether you believe that Jesus should have taken his time to elevate someone who would have never been elevated, interesting conversation. That's what he did. If you're a Christian, you believe that was worth it. But for each of us, wherever we come down on that part of the story, we know that it's true, that what we're distracted from is always more important than what we're distracted by. And if that's true, in order for this series to matter at all, we need to answer a few questions. So if you want to write these down, I won't even be offended. If you don't want to, I'll find you afterwards. Here's the question. As we review, as we slow down and we look backwards and we say, what am I distracted from? If I make the list, if I know what I want out of life, if I know spiritually, emotionally, physically, regarding my family, regarding my job, all these things that I actually want out of life, what am I being distracted from? What is it? What's the goal? And once we define that, and only once we define that, can we move over and say, what am I being distracted by? And when we figure out what we're being distracted by, we can finally figure out how to stop being distracted from. And then, and only then, may we, like Mary, choose what is better. So it's our hope that this series is something where we are able to slow down and review and revision and reconsider what it would look like to figure out what we're distracted from, what we're distracted by, and that we can then be in a place to choose better. So think about those things this week. Let's pray. Father God, all of these things just take time. God, in the midst of the have-to-dos and in the midst of the busyness, slowing down to redefine what we're distracted from and what we're distracted by, it's just another chore. And yet, God, we know that if we don't take the time to define what we're distracted from, and if we don't take the time to define what we're distracted by, that we'll just keep running in circles. And so, Jesus, as we leave today, may we have the courage to honestly assess our lives. May we have the courage to sit down and say, this is what I want. And then may we have the courage to look and say, and this is what's keeping me from that. And God, may you give us the courage and the strength to look to you to help us, like Mary, choose better. Amen.